Alright, in this video we're going to be showing you the basics on how to solder copper pipe. This video will help you in a lot of different cases, such as leaks underneath your kitchen sink or your bathroom sink or by your hot water tank or any copper pipe in your house. You'll be able to use these tips and tricks to learn how to properly fix those leaks without having to hire a plumber. Alright, so first thing you need to know how to do is measure and cut. A lot of the times you're not necessarily going to have to measure the pipe, you're just going to have to be able to know where to cut out that chunk of copper to put in a piece of coupling or cut it out and put in a valve or something like that, but we're going to show you both tricks here. So first we're going to measure the pipe. We are going to be using this sweet piece of wood here to solder it later just for control purposes. So we've already made the measurement, I've already marked it, but I'm just going to kind of show you exactly how to measure the pipe. So I'm going to pull the tape measure from the end and then I'm going to find my mark, say it's 20 1/4. I usually use my thumb, but you can also make a mark. I did make a mark there. So you can just use like a pen. Pen doesn't work that great, but you can use a marker would be the best, but you can just put your thumb there. If it doesn't need to be like a perfect exact measurement, you just put your thumb there. And I like to take my cutters, I'll put them on and I just line up my wheel with where the mark is. So I just kind of hold it. You notice how I have my finger underneath here? It's holding the cutter itself. It helps me to guide and to hold it in the right place, because if you're just kind of like loosey-goosey, it's hard to get it there. So I have a nice little guide there with my finger, and then I just find my mark in my thumb, and I don't tighten it really hard. I just give it like a little turn there. And what I like to do is I just start spinning it to make sure that it doesn't track. Because sometimes this copper wheel, if you don't have really good copper cutters, or like if they're starting to fail, it can start tracking on you and it won't stay on that mark. So you just want to make sure it's there. And then once you know that it's not tracking, you can start tightening it and then start cutting. So then when I do a couple revolutions and then I just give it like a little turn just to tighten it up, and I do a couple more revolutions. And then same thing, just always, you can feel it get looser as you're cutting it. So now that it's looser again, I give it another little tiny turn. A little tip here, a lot of times people that have never cut copper before, this is a very good trick, because if you tighten it too much, and it's going to be hard to turn for one thing. Another thing is you're going to break your wheel and you're going to go through a lot of wheels. So you just do little turns until that copper starts to cut. And you can feel it, like once you've cut a lot of copper before, you can feel when it's almost cut. So I know it's almost cut. I grab it with my other hand so it doesn't just fall on the floor or something like that, and then just do something like that. All right, so now that we've cut the pipe, we're going to want to ream the pipe. So what happens is when you cut it, not sure if you can actually see this there, probably not, but the pipe itself ends up with like a sharp edge on the inside, and what happens is when the water is flowing through the copper, it creates what's called turbulent flow, spinning the water through the pipe and the fittings, and it actually wears out the copper pipe and fittings faster. So what happens is you take a reamer, it actually just shaves off the inside of that burr. You just do a couple revolutions. If you don't have a reamer, it's not a huge deal, but it is nice to have, especially if you're doing like large quantities of copper pipe. If you're just doing like a quick fix, you won't necessarily have to use these, but it is nice to have to create that longevity for your pipe. All right, so now that the pipe is reamed, this is probably the most important part of soldering. So pay attention to this, because if you don't do this part properly, there's a good chance you're gonna have leaks. So you need to make sure the pipe and the fitting are as clean as possible. Make sure that you don't rush this part, because if that pipe and fitting aren't clean, you're gonna have leaks. So when I grab my pipe, I hold my pipe in my left hand. You might be right-handed, whatever it is, doesn't matter. I take my grit cloth. We use grit cloth because it's on both sides. Sand cloth is on one side. We prefer to use grit. But you just grab it around, grip it like this, and just like kind of give it a firm grip, and then just spin your hand forward and back and the pipe at the same time. And I'm gripping pretty tightly to make sure that's super clean. You want to make sure that pipe is as clean as possible and no dirt or anything left over on it. So right there, you can see how clean that copper is. So now that we have the pipe clean, we're going to want to clean our fitting. Again, same thing. Make sure you have a half decent brush. If your brush is wearing out, brushes are pretty cheap. Make sure your brush is in good condition, because if you don't have a good brush, it's not going to properly clean inside the fitting. So make sure that brush is doing its job properly. So usually you just want to go in one direction, but if your brush is starting to wear out, don't start with both directions. I only ever do this. I go backwards when my brush is starting to wear out a little bit. You can utilize the reverse method, but generally brushes are meant to go one direction to the right, like you're tightening something. Generally always do this. Same idea with your pipe. You're just getting it as clean as possible. You want to inspect. I can see right there that it's not fully clean. There's actually still some dirty copper in there. So I'll just keep going at it. And if your brush is starting to wear out, you can go like this, back and forth. But like I said, with a new brush, don't try not to do this. But you want to get in there until that fitting is super clean and you can't see any dirt and it's nice and shiny. All right, so right there you can see how clean the fitting is. It's nice and shiny. This is what you want it to look like. So now that I've explained the one side, I'm just going to do the exact same thing to the other side of the fitting. So I'm going to get her nice and clean. So what this does, this is cleaning off all the dirt so that you can get that capillary action so that the flux actually sucks its way into between the copper pipe and the fitting itself. All right, so next we're gonna wanna use the flux on the fitting and the pipe itself. Another very important part. So these are the two most important parts of soldering. Cleaning the pipe and fitting and fluxing it properly. You wanna make sure you have good clean flux. You don't want a bunch of dirt in there, because if you get a ton of dirt in there, that could cause a leak itself too. So it's just like, you're just essentially painting it on. So you're just putting the flux evenly around the entire pipe. A 1/2 inch fitting is 1/2 inch fitting allowance. So the pipe is going to go inside the fitting a 1/2 inch. So you want to make sure you have at least that 1/2 inch of flux all the way around that pipe. So now that we've done the pipe itself, we're going to do the fitting. And generally I would be holding both of these at the same time, but for video purposes, like this is what I would do. I wouldn't necessarily put this down so that dirt doesn't get on it. So I would actually just hold it like this with my other hand, and I would flux the inside of my fitting. And then all you do is you just shove it in there and make sure it goes in all the way. And then I like to give it a little spin if I can, just to get that even amount to make sure it stays nice and good. All right, so for video purposes, I'm just gonna quickly show you a dry run of how I'm gonna be doing this, and then I'll do a proper solder. But I won't be able to explain it because the torch is too loud for the camera. So let's just go through the steps of what I'm gonna do. So with my torch here, I have a trigger pull, so I just pull the trigger and it lights it. Some people, if you don't have a trigger, you might have to get one with a spark or a lighter, that's fine, as long as you have a good torch. So I'm going to pull my trigger, I'm going to lock this and keep my torch on. And what I'm going to do is I already have my solder. What I've done here is I have my solder kind of sitting out, and I always like to put a bit of an angle on it like this so that I can kind of wrap around and find myself getting in the right tight places for my solder. Because if it's just straight, if you just have it straight like this, you got to kind of like move your arm around too much, and it's way harder to get in there. So we always like to just like take it and bend it like that. And what they say, whatever size of copper you have, you're going to want to use that much solder. So 1/2 inch copper, at least. The bare minimum is a 1/2 inch of solder. Generally you're using more because solder is cheap and leaks are expensive is what they say. So what you're going to want to do here is get your torch lit, get it close to the, not super close. You want to use kind of like the tip of the blue flame to heat the pipe and fitting itself. And what you're doing is you're not just holding it in one place. A lot of guys will just hold it, and we do this sometimes too with 1/2 inch and smaller. You can hold it just on the bottom and then just hit it on the top. Once it's hot, it'll suck that solder all the way down and around. But generally what they tell you, what you're supposed to do is get an even amount of heat around the entire pipe and fitting itself so that you're actually getting the proper heat so that the solder can suck around in the whole fitting itself. All right, so those are all the techniques you're going to need to learn how to solder here. So let's just jump into this and show you how to do it. All right, so that's how you solder. I realize it's probably a lot easier than you thought it would be. It actually is very simple to solder. So don't be discouraged. It's a very easy thing to do. One thing that you probably noticed me doing was I was flicking my joints. I was cleaning them off. I wouldn't recommend doing that with your fingers like I've been doing this for a very long time, but you can take a rag or something and just flick off those little solder nubbits. Not a big deal, it's not gonna affect anything, but it just makes it look nice. You get that nice clean looking solder joint, you look professional, and people are gonna be like, wow, you did a really nice job. All right, so that's the soldering video. Hopefully you learned some stuff here. If you guys have any questions at all, please let us know.